Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Before we hear from Robin Swicord, I would like to introduce the university's Chief Information Officer and Dean of the University Libraries. For the past 9 years, I can't believe it's 9 years. Oh, it's 10? Oh my goodness. Dean Campbell, that was his wife speaking. Dean Campbell has overseen the USC Information Services, a division of the Combined University Computing, Tablet Communications, and University Libraries. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jerry Campbell.
Well, thank you, Regina, for that introduction. And we really appreciate your leadership of the Friends of the USC Libraries. It's been wonderful, and this kind of event is an indication of what a great job the Friends do. 10 years, and you heard my wife down there, and I just have to respond to that. Somebody at this table back here, what table? I can't remember the number, but this table back here said, "How long have you been here?" I said 10 years, and it was sort of that same groan. Well, I got news for you. Talking now to my wife. There's a new country song out, and it's got a line in it that says, "I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was." So you remember that. I like to keep these on a high note. I want to express our profound gratitude to the sponsors of today's literary event: Robert Buchanan, Neil Matsumori, a member of the Friends of the USC Libraries Board, and SBC Communications. And without this kind of support, we don't have these wonderful events. So thank you very much. And I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge Amy Pascal, chairman of Sony Pictures Motion Picture Group. And we're delighted to have you here with us today. And you will really be delighted because that wonderful screenplay book at your seat was courtesy of Sony Pictures. And thank you very much. Now, before I invite Ms. Swicord to the podium, let's watch a short trailer for Memoirs of a Geisha.
A story like mine has never been told. I certainly wasn't born to the life of a geisha.
Your family sold you to this house. You live here now.
This is the new arrival. Let me see those eyes.
You are not a servant anymore.
is off to school with you. You are to become Geisha.
Chio is my new protege. Focus on your studies. Music, the art of conversation.
No, we are rivals.
But true geisha can stop a man in his tracks with a single look. You are ready. Now it's time. You will be the most famous geisha in all Miyako.
I shall destroy you.
The object of every man's fantasy. Celebrate this moment. Tonight, the lights all burn for you.
Sometimes I worry she's taking me further from the things I want.
Forget about him.
Every step I have taken has been to bring myself closer to you.
We do not become geisha to pursue our own destinies.
I want a life that is mine.
I just can't wait. As the clip demonstrates, when there's a book to be adapted for the silver screen, especially one with strong female protagonists, writer Robin Swicord is the person to call. After all, she is widely regarded for her adaptations of Louisa May Alcott's timeless classic Little Women, Christine Bell's The Perez Family, and Alice Hoffman's Practical Magic. She also co-wrote the adaptation of Roald Dahl's Matilda with her husband, Academy Award nominee Nicholas Kazan. Nick is here today as well, right there. Robin and Nick served as selection chairman for last year's USC Scripter Award, the signature event of the Friends of the USC Libraries. The Scripter Award honors both author and screenwriter for the best adaptation of a book to film. Robin and Nicholas, we're excited to have you both here on campus again. Say hello to Nick. Today, Robin will discuss her adaptation of Arthur Golden's best-selling novel, Memoirs of a Geisha. The Sony Pictures film, scheduled for release December 9th and directed by Chicago director Rob Marshall, is about a woman who, during the years leading up to World War II, transcends her fishing village roots to become one of Japan's most celebrated geisha. Fans of Robin's writing soon will also have the opportunity to see one of her original stories come to the big screen. DreamWorks recently bought her screenplay, The Rivals, about the famed clash between actress Sarah Bernhardt and Eleanora Duse. The projects she has been attached to have attracted such Hollywood stars as Sandra Bullock, Kirsten Dunst, Stockard Channing, as well as Oscar winners Nicole Kidman, Susan Sarandon, Marisa Tomei, and Angelica Houston. She is also venturing into directing. She is finalizing an original screenplay that she will direct for Sony Pictures called The Jane Prize, about a family of Jane Austen scholars. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce one of the nation's finest screenwriters, Ms. Robin Swicord.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Tony Miller, for arranging this wonderful event, and Jerry Campbell for that wonderful introduction. Thanks for coming out on a rainy day. I I feel so loved at my table. Some of the most important people in my extended family of friends are here today. My dear friend Amy Pascal, who has been my collaborator since she and I met when she was passing herself off as a development executive for a producer. She was about 22 years old. And she and I had the pleasure of carrying forward the idea of Little Women for 12 years until she had finally put herself into a position of power and could get it made. Walter Teller, my lawyer, is here. My husband and I were married in his house. My friend Lynn Arist is here. She bought my first screenplay, and I often tell people that she was my screenwriting teacher. My agent, David Kramer, who has led me through all of this process on Geisha so wonderfully, and my closest friends, Kenny Turan, who's the film critic for the LA Times, who went to school with my husband, and Patty Williams, who recently, she and I decided to share offices together. It's kind of like getting married again. All right, we love books, right? And we love movies, but we don't always love movies that are adapted from books. Until I was about 20 years old, I didn't even realize that movies were written. This is a part of filmmaking that is hidden from view. So I thought that today it would be sort of fun, since I know that everyone in this room loves books and loves movies, if we could just shine a little light on how a screenwriter would take a book like the book Memoirs of a Geisha and translate it into another art form. When I read Memoirs of a Geisha, I was so completely absorbed that when I looked up from the book, I would be startled to find that I was not in Japan. The book completely seized me, and I know that that was not a unique experience. I think have a lot of people here read Memoirs of a Geisha, I'm assuming, yes. Wasn't that the experience of reading it, that you were completely taken away? And I was reading the book the week, and I ran into Amy, and I said, I am reading the best book. And she said, oh, I just bought that book. And when a president of a studio says that they've bought a book, they don't mean they just got back. And I kind of inwardly cringed. I mean, I think I actually said something to her like, oh no, because I could already imagine the kind of softening of this material in story notes and the wedging of American movie stars into Japanese roles and maybe using English or, using British accents and, a theme park-sized Hanamachi. Amy said, no, we're going to do it right. And they did do it right. It just took a little while. Many previous drafts of the screenplay existed before I ever came to Memoirs of a Geisha as a project. It had been developed by Steven Spielberg. Sony bought the book with Amy, but they were doing they were working with Steven over at DreamWorks Amblin. And he hired writers, he went through many drafts, he hired production designers, he made designs for a Hanamachi to build a big set, and then he did not proceed. He decided to step aside as the director. And so the producers, Lucy Fisher and Doug Wick, started figuring out who they really wanted to take this to completion. And Amy's support for the film was just unflagging, which is really unusual when you think of the kinds of movies that usually get made. It was unusual for a studio to say, I want to spend a lot of money on a movie that takes place in a completely different culture with no American movie stars. And it is a book that sold very, very widely, but mostly to female readers. So right away they're making a movie that costs a lot of money. Amy's over there going, what have I done? Why did I do this? I can't believe she's talking about what a stupid decision I made. It's getting worse. So, really, Amy needed her head examined. But nonetheless, unflaggingly carried this film forward. And they waited for Rob Marshall, brilliant director, who had done such a beautiful job on Chicago. They had to wait for him to be extricated from another contract, so that was a year. And then he came in and read the screenplays, and he said, I want to start over. So that's expensive. So they started over. And I got a telephone call from Doug Wick and Lucy Fisher saying, change out of your pajamas and come down to this meeting. Rob Marshall is in town for an hour or something, and he's on his way to the airport because you just come in and say hi and meet him. I had not read the book at this point in 4 years. So I went into a meeting. I was so thrilled to be meeting Rob Marshall. And I told him that I hated being so poorly prepared for essentially a story meeting. But I did talk about the book, what I remembered of it, as having a kind of David Lean feel to it, that the first part of the book to me felt like Jane Eyre. And the second part of the book was sort of Cinderella Pygmalion. And the last part of the book was like Gone with the Wind. And we said that we would speak again. He was so gracious. And I left that meeting thinking, I know he's going to be talking to a lot of other writers, and it's probably really a long shot, but I want to read the book again, just in case I get called back to a meeting. And I read the book again over a winter holiday break with the family, once again disappearing into Japan while everybody else was in Hawaii. And I came back from that, and I sat down, and I just wrote 18 pages of notes, kind of outlining how I saw the film. And I emailed them to Rob Marshall, and later he said to me, sometimes an actor will come into an audition and they will just seize the role. And during their audition that this role belongs to them. And he said, that is what happened when you sent me those notes. You claimed this movie. So I was extremely fortunate, I feel, to have been called in for this, and to have had a partner like Rob Marshall who so completely understood the novel. The first part of adaptation is taking apart the book. And we've all written those papers in English class where you're sort of analyzing this. And when I was in school, it was all about symbolism, this means that. And I would go like, why not call up the writer and ask them, because I'm not sure that means that. But we all learned how to sort of break books apart. And what most people do when they're adapting books, myself included, is you sort of make a roadmap of the book. You make an outline as if you were the novelist, and you write down what happens page by page and scene by scene until you get deeply underneath the book. And then you start to look at the book to understand the forces that are driving it thematically. So there were certain things in this book that I was drawn to, besides the plot, besides the beautiful, the clothing, just the mystery of that world that had shut off from all of us here. I was interested in these sort of submerged themes of the cruelty of beauty, that they would go to the beauty parlor and they'd have this hot wax drawn through their hair and, an agonizing process, and then have to sleep essentially on a little stilt, a little wooden block under their head. The bound bodies, the binding of the body, the strings underneath the obi, so that you see this beautiful surface, but underneath it you're really bound by ropes that are kind of cutting into your rib cage. The rigors of the training to become an artist, to do they dip their hands in ice water to make them freeze and then play the shamisen so that their hands will be numb as they're playing it because the strings are painful. The starvation, we know from the book how poorly they were fed, and there is very much in that culture the same kind of thing that we see in the fashion world, if you can't be too thin. And also the sexual abstinence, that they never really have a personal life as young women and older women. They don't marry. And unless they have a patron who sort of becomes their sugar daddy in a Western sense, they are not expected to be sexual. It's actually frowned upon. So I was drawn to that. I was drawn to their self-objectification. I had done quite a lot of work researching in the modeling world, and I remember meeting this hairdresser, Frederick Fakai, who was describing to me a model he'd recently met and how beautiful she was. And he said, he's French, he said, she's négagée, she's negated. She was completely empty, which meant that she was beautiful. She could be projected upon. And that is the mask of the geisha. I was also interested in this power struggle of women competing in a very narrow arena for the only prize allowed to them, which was to be the fairest in the land. So in working with Rob Marshall, what he brought to this process, aside from an absolutely stunning visual imagination, was a profound understanding of Arthur Goldrin's book. He loved the glamour of the geisha world, the intrigue, the secrets kept, the political rivalries between the women, but he also loved the perspective that I was bringing to him. He was not afraid to explore things that are unique to the feminine experience. He was connected to Sayuri emotionally. She's the little girl who in the first part of the book we know is Chio. When she becomes a Maiko, a sort of junior geisha, her name is changed to Sayuri. And he was connected to this little child who had no childhood, that rise from obscurity, fighting for recognition in this theater world. He was a member of the chorus line in Cats. You know, he spent 20 years laboring in the theater as a kind of obscure dancer before he was allowed to become a choreographer and really, he'd choreographed Cabaret, that revival. And from there he was given Chicago. So he responded to that struggle toward fame. And then when her world is destroyed and that fame is gone, he connected to that person finding her inner strength and going after the thing that she wanted all along. So we were unusually simpatico in our understanding of this material. And we worked together. I went to New York and I was there over 2 periods of time, about 6 weeks altogether. I had done a lot of reading and research before I went. I had spent an entire weekend. This was a phenomenal experience, an entire weekend working with John Meyer, who was the production designer. And we walked into the room at Red Wagon. There was a banquet table laid out with copies of books, art books collected from all over the world in all kinds of languages, with images of the geisha world, Japan, Japanese history, textiles, pottery. We immersed ourselves in those images and marked them to be color Xeroxed. And I brought Rob a stack of images like this. And he went through these with me, and we made a book which told the story of the movie before there was a script, when there was only my outline, that told the story of this movie in images. And many of these images, in one form or another, found their way into the movie. It was like seeing the seeds grow in a director's mind. So it was a very privileged experience to work with him that way. We spent a lot of time reading aloud to each other from the book, saying, this is very important. I can't tell you how different that is. I've worked with directors in the past without ever having. I worked with a director who had never read the book, the underlying book, and never would. So to have somebody who so completely embraced the book was a joy. So let's talk a little bit about just an almost purely technical aspect of how you go from a book to a screenplay. There's something that dramatists and screenwriters have to think about that novelists never have to think about. And it is a kind of rigor of form. Drama unfolds in a certain way. Novels can be discursive. They can be completely internal. You can stay inside one room. You can stay inside one person's mind. The person doesn't even have to be sane. Regina thinks that's funny. Usually we're not. But we screenwriter dramatists are working from something that's very profound. And Aristotle made an attempt to write about it when he wrote the Poetics. The Poetics are essentially a series of lectures written well after the fact, in which Aristotle sat down and read maybe 10,000 plays. And he said, now I see, I am recognizing a human phenomenon that when we go into the theater and we see drama unfold, we see the same form all the time. And he did his best to describe what that form was. The reason there were 10,000 plays for him to read is because theater was the religious ceremony of the Greeks. To go to the theater would be as to go to church or temple. Their religion was sort of borderline animist. They had gods, but the gods represented certain kinds of forces of nature, like the god of the sea, and this person associated with the wind, and so forth. And narratives about these gods attended everything, and those narratives became these plays. And one thing that was interesting about these plays is that many of them, a certain category of them, which are called mystery plays, ended in human sacrifice. So we know about the Aztecs, of course, that they had human sacrifice as part of their religion. I found out recently that when St. Patrick was captured as a slave in what we now call England and was taken as a slave to Ireland, he found the Celts there practicing human sacrifice. So that was, human sacrifice went on in Western cultures well into the first millennium. The Greeks began to do human sacrifice metaphorically. They saw plays in which we observed some violent end toward the end of the play, and we experienced catharsis. So think of this next time you hear somebody say, "Why are movies so violent?" Movies are rooted in a tradition that began with human sacrifice. So he wasn't giving us a formula, Aristotle. He was helping us recognize something that's very deep in our blood, a human phenomenon. And he thought that if you followed his ideas of how you structure drama, that when the incidents of the story were arranged in their tragic sequence, they already produced some of the tragic effect, even when characters were hardly more than names. So we know this to be true, right, from bad movies that we have seen with thin characters and lame dialogue, and it still squeezes a cathartic response from us. It's deep in us. It's really embedded. So when we come to a novel, there is a responsibility in turning that into drama to observe the conventions that Aristotle had found in these 10,000 plays. They're still with us today. It's a kind of box that we have to write in. It's boundaries. And I picked up the New Yorker this past week, and I saw that the poet John Ashbery, who writes this very free-form verse, it's completely unrhymed. Some people think it's even nonsensical. It just seems like a kind of stream of consciousness. When he teaches, this is how he teaches. He gives his students exercises. He gives them a text, an existing text, a poem, in a language that none of them know, like Finnish. And he tells them, translate this into English. It's a gift he's trying to give them so that it's not such a big and frightening world. You're just going to go out there and write free verse. How do I start? He gives them a place to start. So when we come to a novel and take it apart and get underneath it and understand it and identify its thematic material, we are also looking for that form, which in drama unfolds in 3 movements. Might be called the beginning, the middle, and the end. So in the first part, there's motivation, there's desire. The protagonist wants something. The protagonists might find themselves in a situation. In Memoirs of a Geisha, Sayuri Chiyo finds herself taken away from her family and sold to an okia in the Hanamachi in Kyoto. But she wants something. Initially, she says, I want to see my sister again, because she's wrenched away from her family. And then when she realizes that she'll never see her sister again, around that time, she meets the chairman, and she says, I want to know this person and be in his world. And the whole middle part of the story, she spends trying to get herself into a situation as a geisha where she can spend time with him and be recognized by him. She can't even express that she wants love, in a sense. She just wants to be near him. And when that is denied, And the war intervenes in the novel. We see her go away and kind of face the fact that her world is gone. She's lost her world. And she has to renew that desire to move toward him. So that, what Aristotle called the praxis, that motive, that desire, becomes the thread that drives like an arrow through this screenplay. And if you go to the video store and you're going down and you're looking at all your favorite movies, you can stop for a second and say, what is the praxis? What did this main character in this movie want? You will find that it is consistent through every movie. It's part of drama. Attendant on this desire, this motivation, is passion. Aristotle called pathos. Even as the lead character's desires moves the story forward and moves them to action, they suffer because of something that they can't control. And what Sayuri, Chiyo, can't control is that there is another geisha, Hatsumomo, who views her as a rival from the time she's a really little child and does nothing except set obstacles in her way. Obstacles toward her fame, which will eventually put her with the chairman, and then when she knows about the chairman, obstacles to getting to him. So the challenge in this kind of a novel is for when it's a rivalry like this, and we have Hatsumomo who's a grown-up and Chiyo who's a little girl, is how do you make sure that the movie is about Chiyo and Sayuri and not about Hatsumomo who's defending her territory? And so you have to select those scenes from the book that support Sayuri as the protagonist. And you are always trying to balance between her reacting to the stuff that Hatsumomo is doing and her moving forward with a kind of determination to get what she wants. That middle section of drama, what Aristotle called the episodes, is a time when we see this action and reaction between different people taking things, the emotional action and reaction, the physical events that happen and how they push the next event into existence. This happens, and then because this happens, that has to happen. And because that's happened, now this has to happen. Novelists don't have that kind of constraint. Novels, wonderful novels that we all love, can go along and then, and then, and then, but there's this tremendous causality in drama. And you have to look at a kind of chain of events that get set in motion. So, toward the end of what Aristotle called the episodes, in which in our movie sort of coincides with that part in the book where, if you remember, Hatsumomo is dancing drunkenly at a party, and somebody slips an eel in her dress, and she starts wiggling around, and people can see, her underclothes, and she bites a kabuki actor on the lip, and he bleeds. Well, I couldn't wrap my brain around that. I really tried, in dramatic terms, to understand how that kind of action, that kind of episode selected from the book could bring about a reversal of fortune for Hatsumomo. And in dramatic terms, I really could not. And so that was the first place where I stopped in the book and I went, I hate to have to invent on top of Arthur Golden's wonderful thing, but I have to find a substitution for this. And that is part of one of the tasks in front of us when we adapt a book, is trying to figure out when you have to make a substitution like that. So you will see when you see the film what we substituted, but we were looking for something that, after all is said and done, when you move forward in drama, we say, it must seem surprising, and as you look back, it must seem inevitable. So all the seeds of what happens at the end of Act 2, before the war began, before we're immersed in the war, rather, all of those things have been set in motion before, including the downfall of Hatsumomo. I was also looking for something that would be like the burning of Atlanta in Gone with the Wind, a sense almost metaphorical, that whatever happened at this point, the world is swept away, and we'll never go back to the Guion as we knew it. and Sayuri is going to be faced, she has to face herself behind her mask as a geisha and ask herself, what do I want more than anything? And so what I actually came up with was Hatsumomo. Instead of having the dance, she sets fire to the yokiya. If you read the book all the way through, you'll see that this fear of fire is mentioned all the time. And in fact, one of the geishas that Arthur Golden was close to, an American woman named Liza Dalby, her older sister, who's sort of the fairy godmother mentor for a geisha being brought along, was burned to death in her okiya. And it's a huge loss of property because there are millions of dollars worth of kimonos that burn in a situation like that, and loss of life. And when you go to Kyoto and you walk and you see how all the buildings are made of wood and paper, you think, yeah, fire would be a big concern. So we use that fire, and it becomes something that launches us into the war. I saw a beautiful image, which is actually in the film. I saw a photograph of airplanes flying over the torii gates of Kyoto. And you saw it in the trailer as well. And so after this fire, out of the smoke and ash and all of that, you see these come in, and now it's later, now we're in World War II. I never saw this film as being this book as being untranslatable to film. Maybe because for me it broke down so clearly into the three movements. I always had confidence that we would be able to bridge the cultural differences, that if we were all willing to immerse ourselves, which we were, in this very strange place, if we approached it with respect, and if we, always kept in mind that Arthur Golden himself was an American man living in New York City. Yes, he was a scholar of Japanese stuff, but he wasn't female, he wasn't a geisha, he wasn't Japanese, and he still brought us this world. So it helped knowing that he had come ahead of us, and that we just had to not blow it. Geisha, the word geisha, sha is it's like saying ishin or ist, on the like an artist or a beautician. It's a piece of a word that connotes a person who does. And gei means arts. So geisha means artist. And in fact, the job of being a geisha is rooted in the theater. Courtesans in Japan at one time performed in the theaters as musicians and dancers. They were part of a kind of bohemian theater culture that I found when I was researching the lives of Eleanor Dusa and Sarah Bernhardt, that in Paris in the 19th century, the world brought to us by Toulouse-Lautrec's paintings, that was a world in which the women who were on stage were also prostitutes or courtesans. Sarah Bernhardt was a courtesan. Her mother and her aunt and her grandmother were courtesans. So when I started doing the research on this world of the courtesan, and this is a wonderful book that I found by John Gallagher, which is a really in-depth look at the geisha world. If you get fascinated in the movie by the geisha world, this is a great book. I learned that in 1750 a kind of repressive regime took over, and it was decided that women could no longer perform on the stage. And rather than shut these theaters down, men took the roles of women. And they still take the roles of women today in the kabuki theater. We went to see kabuki in Kyoto, and it was men dressed up as women, just as it was in Shakespeare's time. What happened with these courtesans who had given themselves to art is that they went into the tea houses to perform. And so this private world of female performance happened, and a culture built up around that. When you go to the tea houses today and see geishas, they are wearing the clothes, their hairstyles, the makeup, they're doing the dances, they are singing the songs and playing the music that was popular 250 years ago. It's like going to Williamsburg and seeing people making candles and shoeing horses and so forth. You're really visiting. It's like a time capsule. And so when people go to the tea house now, it's because they want to go visit a very traditional world. So I feel like most people here know the story, so I'm going to sort of skip over the stuff where we're talking about, what happens in the story, and just go right to this idea about about what happens when she makes her decision that the chairman is the guy for her. And in the novel, it happens. Oh, I forget what chapter I used to know, but it happens sort of at the end of childhood. We don't stay in her childhood after that. We sort of move ahead to when she's older, and the movie does the same thing. And that's a creative decision. I know that when Spielberg was working on it, they were worried about double casting and having the child and so forth, and they just wanted to start right with Sayuri. She's all grown up. And in our case, Rob felt very strongly in this kind of homage to David Lean that we really had to look at Jane Eyre and Oliver Twist and do the child's life. And at that point, when her family is dead, she has tried to escape and been found out. She's been cruelly mistreated by the people that she's with. Now she's told by Mother that she's not going to be a geisha. She's going to be a slave. She has to pay off the cost of being bought. She has to pay off her sister's price because her sister's run away without her. And she has to pay for all the food that she's ever eaten or ever will eat. And essentially, she's never going to escape, and she knows this. And exactly at that moment, they hand her the funeral tablets of her parents, and she knows that no rescue is coming. So Arthur Golden describes Chio's depression at that point well. He says, "I felt like a child lost on the lake in the fog. The days spilled one into another in a muddle. I remember only snippets of things aside from a constant feeling of misery and fear." So she's in this terrible state. And then she meets the man that Arthur Golden has her describe as my bodhisattva with 1,000 arms. And the Buddhist religion of bodhisattva is a soul that no longer needs to be reincarnated because they've already achieved enlightenment. But the soul makes a decision to come back, be reincarnated, and do all the hardships of the world in order to help others. So this man that she identifies as her bodhisattva is this businessman, the chairman of Iwamura Electric. And they have an encounter on a bridge during Sakura, during the cherry blossom time. And when they part, she has this epiphany. If only she could change her fate, if she could somehow become a geisha and cross over into his world, she would be able to be in the presence of this being. So her connection to him is actually religious. And when I had the privilege of going to Kyoto with the group of us that went, after I had done the outline, we then went to meet geishas and scout Japan and immerse ourselves as much as we could in this kind of crash course of Japanese culture. When I went there, one of the things that I was so struck by was how much religious life imbues every aspect of daily contemporary life. The colors of things on the wall corresponding to the seasons. And by religious, I should say Shinto, this animist religion that is nature worshiping. So where the flower is put in the room, the scroll on the wall, the height of the table, everything is prescribed, and it's all connected up to meaning. The way you enter the room, humbling yourself. The doors, when you step into a tea room, the doors are low, so you humble yourself as you come in. And we went to see sumo. I didn't understand that sumo is basically, it's like theater. It's like the human sacrifice. They go and they bless the ground with salt. They bow to the four corners of the world. It's not like an American wrestling match. It actually has profound meaning. Well, I came back knowing all this and having this new understanding, and then looked at Arthur's book and I said, that's not there. So the other part of adapting is you have to know where to draw the line. I couldn't just all of a sudden start imbuing this with my understanding of a culture that I had experienced when that wasn't what Arthur Golden had set out to do. This thing of the compression of scenes is probably what people object to most when they see adaptations of books that they love. They go, my favorite thing didn't even make it to the movie. Oh, I love that. Well, that's not even the movie. People get dropped. Why did they drop her, But it's important to remember that a novel is adapted. The way Shakespeare wrote his plays, which were all new plays, many of those were adaptations of existing stories and histories that were well known by the audiences. And he was making something new. So the hard thing for us, since we all revered Arthur's books so much and wanted to do a good job, the hard thing for us was to say sometimes we must depart because we are actually making something new. I came across something that Nabokov wrote, it was also in that same issue of The New Yorker, and he was ripping to shreds translations of Russian works by people other than himself. And he said, of all the sins of the translator, the third and worst degree of turpitude is reached when a masterpiece is planished and padded into such a shape, vilely beautified in such a fashion as to conform to the notions and prejudices of a given public. That is a crime to be punished by the stocks as plagiarists were in the shoebuckle days. So I left that word planished and I had to look it up, and it means to smooth by rolling or hammering. Well, it's funny, my husband and I call that ironing. One of us will come back from a story meeting and the other will say, well, how was it? And everyone was ironing. So we wanted to do a minimum of ironing, and yet we wanted to compress where we had to. One of the things that helped me in this compression that I got out of the trip to Japan was an understanding that not everything needed to be expressed, that some things could simply be suppressed, and that there was a kind of charge of emotion. If you remember in the movie Sense and Sensibility, she spends the whole movie, Emma Thompson, hiding her love, wishing that things could be, but never speaking of it. And when the guy Hugh Grant finally walks in the door and goes, you're the one, she just bursts into tears. Well, what we had in this story of this girl waiting and hoping and, working very hard not to make her be passive, but the obstacles come, she goes around them. There was such a quiet and suppressed quality to yearning and yearning and yearning for the whole book. And then we got to the end of the movie and we never had the moment where people would suddenly just cry, where he walks in the door and it's okay and whang, so. What I found when I was there was that there was something that was valued in Japanese culture in dramatic terms more than anything. And it's this image here, which I bought when I was in Japan. This is a woodcut. And it is a woman who is lifting her kimono and biting her sleeve. And this thing of the sleeve and the teeth you see over and over in etchings, particularly etchings of courtesans and geishas who are denied love. They don't have the right to love. And they are suppressing their emotion. So when we got to the end of the movie, there was a kind of little thing about, well, it's kind of quiet, we have the war, we lose the Guion, she comes back, Nobu, who is the chairman's partner, asks if she will do them a favor and entertain someone for them. And she does, and she's still hoping that the chairman will notice her and she'll have a moment alone with him. You're waiting and waiting. And finally, she does the kind of sacrificial act, because one of the attributes of drama is that at the end, toward the end, there's sacrifice, catharsis, and transformation. So she makes this kind of sacrifice of debasing herself in the book by sleeping with the Japanese minister. And she comes out of that, and a really active heroine would go like, and now I'm going to go get that chairman, But of course she doesn't do that in the book. She's modest. And she has to wait for the phone call from the chairman. And it drove everyone crazy. In the ironing, planishing mode of note giving. What do we do about this quiet ending? And we found ourselves about 4 weeks from starting rehearsal, still in much dispute about this part of the ending and whether or not we could just accept that Arthur Golden's ending, the quiet ending, the ending with suppressed emotion and the biting of the kimono sleeve, was going to be enough to carry the day and make an American audience happy. Those were the shoals that we ran upon at the end. The other thing that was sort of interesting about the ending had to do with a point that I disconnected in the novel, which is when the Japanese minister at the end comes, and she's supposed to entertain him for Nobu and the chairman. And he's disgusting, and he has squid guts on his breath and drooling out of his mouth, and he's drunk and vomiting, and he throws himself out of a window accidentally. And, you're just going like, wow, I felt about it like about the eel dance. It's like, well, I don't really know what to do with this. But more importantly, where I stopped on that was that my father was in the occupying force in Kyoto. He was a young sailor, and I had grown up with this taciturn father who really didn't talk much about the war, but he told me about Kyoto and the beautiful temples, the Japanese culture, how much he admired the Japanese people. And he talked about how Americans had kind of overturned the culture that was there. And when I got to that point in the book, I missed that. I said, where are the Americans? Atlanta has burned. We're not going to be entertaining Japanese ministers, are we really? So when I met with Arthur Golden, he came down from Boston, and we met for about 6 hours in New York. I asked him about that. And he said, well, I wrote this book for 20 years, and for 17 years, the person who was the protagonist in the novel was a man. It wasn't a geisha. It was an American serviceman after World War II in Kyoto. He said, and I got to that point of the book when I finally understood that it was about a geisha, and I did my research, and I went to Japan, and I met with geishas, and I came back. I got to that point in the novel, and I thought, I can't go back there. I can't write the American voice. And he said, and there had been a version of Nobu, who was a Japanese minister who was disgusting. He said, that was Nobu. Nobu originally was a kind of disgusting guy with squid guts and drunk and vomiting. He said, and as I wrote Nobu, I began to kind of fall in love with him a little, and I didn't want him to be that guy. He says, so I changed him. But over here was this fragment of this character. And when he got to that part in the book, in the version that was published to the world, he just reached over and took that character and put him in instead of having an American. So we said, do you mind if we do Americans instead? Because to us that felt like the more truthful choice, and he very much agreed, very, very graciously agreed. So I've seen this film twice now, and I just think that quiet ending works like gangbusters. Watching it, I knew every moment, every line, sometimes every image from the work that we had done together, and yet I was still swept away. So I can only look back in gratitude on the experience of getting to live in Sayuri's world. Thank you.
All right. Now, as is our habit, and with Robin's agreement, she will take a few questions if you have them. So please.
I heard there was some kind of dispute about the authenticity of the geisha that had supposedly been interviewed in this book. Can you elaborate on that?
I don't know all the details of that. I know that she did sue Arthur Golden, saying that he had taken her story, and that they were able to settle that, with a money payment to her, just to make the lawsuit go away. So it was never determined by a court of law, what exactly happened. But Arthur went to Japan and interviewed a number of people, including a woman who had sort of fought in a kind of political way, as I understand it, with other people who lived in the Gion. It's a very small part of town, really, really tiny, much smaller than this campus, just really a few streets. And she was on the outs with people, and she talked to this American writer, Arthur as a kind of way of like divulging all. He didn't use the events of her life. He used some of the information that she divulged, particularly about the selling of Miss Wage, the selling of one's virginity, and other things. And then after his book came out, she got so much flack from her community for having kind of ripped the veil aside that she was upset, and I don't know all of her reasons, but she did sue him, and they settled the part. I don't think there was anything inauthentic in what Arthur did. I think the question was more or less, how much of her life did he actually use? He feels he used none of it.
The book itself was not a big hit in Japan, but throughout the world it was a very big hit. How do you feel with the screenplay and the motion picture will do in Japan? Do you have any feelings on that?
Of course, I hope it does well, because I want everyone in the world to love our movie. But I think that it's very hard to see your own culture depicted, and there are things that people, I'm sure, got wrong, and so they may watch it and just feel like, this isn't right. This isn't Japanese music. These aren't Japanese people. And look, they're wearing the wrong color. It's fall. They're wearing green. So I can't even begin to guess what they might feel. But it's to me a very powerful human story. And if they can transcend the kind of, that isn't exactly what I would have done, if they can get past that, I hope that they will love it.
I spent 2 years in the Marines in Japan from 48 to 52. And I admired the Japanese people, especially the Geisha. To my knowledge, as a former Marine, they were to be held in awe. Everybody wanted to become a Geisha there.
That's nice to hear.
I really enjoyed the casting of the protagonist for Sayuri. I'm going to mispronounce her name, Zhang Zizi?
Zhang Zi, yeah.
Okay. And I know that there was a big outcry, the fact that she's Chinese and not Japanese. How did you feel about that?
I felt fine about it. I think she's an incredibly good actress. I think there was kind of I'm not disputing it, but I think there was kind of a small outcry. I think there was just it was a very small group of people who were going like, why can't it just be all Japanese? But that was a subject much discussed. It's not something people just did like, oh, what the heck, let's just cast whoever. It was much discussed, and they did a very intensive talent search. Spielberg searched for 4 years and never was able to cast it all out of Japan. There were great actresses coming out of China because the roles were there. When you look at Japanese cinema, the female roles aren't there, therefore the actresses aren't there. Doesn't mean they won't be sometime. They just, at this snapshot in time when they were casting it, they felt that they had to cast the net a little bit broader if they were going to get the level of acting that they wanted all through it. But they did try very hard, and they worked with Japanese casting directors. I think Rob saw every woman who could walk in a kimono before they moved off that idea.